When we trial, we make a difference in breast cancer research.
When we trial, we save Black lives.
When we trial, we defy the odds.
When we trial, we do it for our sisters.
When we trial, we do it for our daughters and our sons.
When we trial, we set a new standard of care.
I was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer while I was active duty in the military. And I was sitting at my desk one day and I sneezed. And I was like, well, that's weird. But when I sneezed, it burned. And I was like, something's not right. So I went to my doctor and I told her, I said, it just feels like it's my breast. So maybe like a week later, I had my mammogram. And the young lady told me to sit down. And I was like, uh-oh. Well, when I was sneezing, what had happened was it had spread to my liver and ribs. So I think then my fight started, was when I realized, okay, I'm up for the fight for my life. So she said, well, you know, I got this good clinical trial. You can go on it as a second phase. And she said, I think it'll work for you. But the first thing I asked her was like, am I gonna be a guinea pig? You know, because of our, you know, history with the Black culture. We started talking and she said, yeah, so you're gonna have to sign an informed consent. And I was like, what's that? You know, and she explained it to me. It's a 41, for me, it was a 41-page document. So it basically gives you everything about the trial. I'm still here and it still works. Clinical trials are important. This is top-notch research that we need to have as a Black community. Clinical trials are safe. You know, somebody had to have been on a clinical trial for me, even for any FDA-approved drug. Just think that all the Black women that are going to benefit from my genes, from my blood work, from my biopsy, now they can see how Black women respond to this medicine. And now this clinical trial that I was on, which has been FDA approved, they're using it for stomach cancer. So it's reaching out. So I'm just like, man, you know, this is how I want to live my legacy.
Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hey, Taylin. Hey, Dr. Keith.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. It's International Clinical Trials Day.
Woohoo!
And we're so excited to celebrate this day, to celebrate this special, special day. Many people don't think it's a big deal, but I think it's a huge deal. And so many people are staying alive because of clinical trials.
Exactly.
Yes, they are.
Yes, they are. And because of you, Dr. Keith, but we are here to talk with a bunch of our friends. We've gathered a bunch of our friends from pharma, some doctors, some patients, to talk about the kind of the state of clinical trials with the Black cancers. And, you know, normally I talk about breast cancer. Dr. Keith talks about prostate cancer. Taylor talks about everything, but we really want to focus on what we call the Black cancers. And what are they? They are breast cancer, lung cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer, and multiple myeloma. And for all of these cancers, really with the exception of breast, we over-index on incidence of the cancer, right? And then we definitely significantly over-incidence on mortality rate. And for breast cancer, you know, we have the same incidence as white women, except for young women, but we have a 41% higher mortality rate. And Keith, help me out with the prostate numbers. We're getting prostate cancer, Black men at 3 times the rate of white men.
Oh, you're muted.
You're on mute.
We're looking at the death rate, and remember, what we're looking at, the incidence rate is 70 to 80% higher, depending on where you are. And this is a very important point. Don't get caught up in the fact that we generalize our society all over the United States. When you go down to the county level and you start to see there's dramatic differences. So you can have 2 to 3 times incidence rates in counties compared to the state. So the incidence rate varies, but yes, from the general population, the incidence rate for prostate cancer, 70, 80% higher. The death rate has consistently been twice as high. And this is something I want to say for both breast and prostate cancer. Since the beginning of the National Cancer Institute, this disparity in cancer has existed for us.
So this is not new news. And I
No.
think for colon, it's like 20% higher. For multiple myeloma, it's about the same. And so all of these cancers have a higher incidence. And guess what? We don't really know why. We don't really know why. And that's the scary part, because, you know, colon cancer of all of these is probably the only one that's really preventable. Like you can get the polyp cut out on a colonoscopy, but the others, they just sort of come out of nowhere. And even for breast cancer for young Black women under 35 are getting breast cancer at twice the rate of white women dying at 3 times the rate.
Yeah.
Think about that. Well before they would have that first mammogram at age 40. And even colon cancer, we're now seeing colon cancer, you know, affecting younger Black people before they would have their first colonoscopy. So, and the screening guidelines are not in our favor. So,
and I want to throw out one other tidbit. It's even worse in the military.
yeah.
So women and men, both breast and prostate cancer incidence is higher. It's increasing in the military.
Isn't that crazy? And we know that I think the number for breast cancer is 40% of Black women in the military will get breast cancer. That's crazy. So we just showed you a video of our dear sweet friend, Sheila Johnson, and she's really been our poster child for clinical trials. She was on the Enhertu trial for 6 years, and it gave her 6 years of life, and she passed just under a month ago, but she's been with us along this journey all the way, talking about her experience and being the example of what a clinical trial looks like. And clearly she was advocating for women really until about 3 weeks before she passed. And so she's our poster child for doing this work. And she's an example of someone who was told she was going to die well before she lived on for 6 years on a trial. It really gave her time and life and time with her daughter and time. And she spent pretty much every minute of her life advocating for trials and helping people understand them. And so we know there's a lot of fear about clinical trials. We know there's a lot of, kind of mistrust, but we think it's just because we don't know what they're about. Whoever talked to them about us, our doctors aren't inviting us to trials. We don't really know what they do, but so we really want to spend today talking about what exactly is a trial? How does it work? What are we up against as patients? What are the opportunities for us to gain life? And how can we talk about it? So it's not really about science. It's about having another birthday. It's about seeing a grandbaby being born. It's about seeing a wedding happen. I'm alive because of experimental drugs. And I would never have seen both of my daughters get married and have 3 grandbabies had I not done those drugs. And so my doctor gave me 2 years to live. I'm on 12. And so it's really important to do this work. And frankly, and Dr. Keith, I need for you to explain this because you're a doctor and you're better at it than me, but a clinical trial, there's no sugar pills in cancer research. You're not going to get a sugar pill. You're going to get standard of care. So what does that mean, Dr. Keith? Help me.
So let's first thing I want to mention this. The National Comprehensive Cancer Network. Okay. These are the institutions and panelists that sit on a disease panel, and they write the guidelines for all oncologists, all cancer patients, all cancer doctors to follow. So and what do they say? They say you will get the best treatment if you participate in a clinical trial.
Say that again, the best.
You will get the best treatment if you participate in a clinical trial. So these are the doctors who are responsible for creating the guidelines for your treatment. Now, what's interesting, and that very important point was this. In cancer treatment, you're not going to get a sugar pill in replacement of the treatment. What's going to happen is this. I try to tell everybody, it's kind of a simple analogy, but if you look at what's going to happen. Like it's an ice cream sundae. 3 scoops of ice cream, and this is mine. This is where I make mine. So 3 scoops of ice cream, chocolate syrup, nuts, whipped cream. So that's your standard of care. That's your standard. But then when you get a clinical trial, it's 3 scoops of ice cream, chocolate syrup, right? Nuts, whipped cream, and then a cherry. So you're always at a minimum will get the care that anybody would get. And this care is going to be based upon the National Comprehensive Cancer Network's guidelines. The standard of care is what's important. And if you participate, it's not one person who's going to be monitoring your case like this. And if you don't participate in a clinical trial, you have committees, you have groups, you have multiple healthcare providers who are constantly making sure. It's almost like, think of it like concierge medicine, concierge care. And there was something else I want to say is this. There's a difference between those people who don't have cancer and those people who do. And so sometimes what you'll have is the people that don't have cancer say, well, you know, what Tuskegee study and Henrietta Lacks. But the cancer patient is looking to do exactly what you said. See their son or daughter graduate, see their grandchildren play with their grandchildren another day. And that's what clinical trial can do.
Yeah.
Another day,
another sunrise, another chance of life, right? Another day of life. So I think we have some great people to talk to today. Some of our amazing pharma partners that we work with that are building trials and trying to get more Black people into them, and some patients. So let's bring it. Come on, we have 2 panels we're going to do today. So, Taylor, did you want to say anything to introduce us, or?
Yes, I just wanted to share. Hi, I'm Taylin Washington Harmon. I'm the clinical trials editor here at BDO. And, Black people, we make up 13% of the US population, yet we're only in 8% clinical trial participation. So this town hall is extremely key to helping us understand what clinical trials are all about. So we're going to bring some amazing people from Bayer, Amgen, Genentech, just to talk about, how can you get involved in a trial? So
yeah, can you do that? Great. And we say we're not represented from the population perspective, but when you start to think about the incidence and the mortality rates, we need to be commensurate with the burden of disease, and so that's what we'll talk about today too. So let's bring on our first panel of our.
And then I wanted to make sure that we also let the audience know that there are different types of clinical trial.
Yes,
it's even worse when we start talking about interventional clinical trials. Now, that means that you have a disease, and then we're going to treat you for that disease. Our participation in those type of clinical trials are 3 and 4%. And especially in cancer patients, we don't want a registry. We want an interventional. We want something that's going to slow down or stop that cancer.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important.
Yeah. So whether we have cancer or not, we got to learn about this.
So let's bring in Pooja Merchant from Bayer. Oh, we have Amy Vassal from Genentech.
Yeah.
Cassandra Skip from Amgen.
Yep.
Oh, Tammy Williams. Cassandra. And is that everyone? No.
We're missing
Danielle
Annabella. And Z.
Hey, everybody's
everyone. Everyone.
Hello.
Wow, it's so great to see you, beautiful people. Keith, look at what I got for you. I'm women. Beautiful, smart women. Beautiful, brilliant women.
You know, my problem is that I'm just throwing around a whole bouquet of roses.
So here we are. We have our great team, and you guys want to do like a 2-second quick introduction of yourself so people know who you are. But these are the people that we work with all the time who just support us and help us and give us the resources that we need to do this important work. So Amy, I love
Hi.
it.
Hello, everybody. I'm Amy Vassell. I work as a clinical program leader at Genentech in U.S. Medical Affairs, working on women's health studies. So happy to be here.
Great. Pooja.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pooja. I work in the medical team and I head the work we do with the patient community in oncology at Bayer.
Kemi.
Hello, everyone. Happy to meet you all. I am within the Chief Medical Office at AstraZeneca. I help to co-lead the shaping and definition and I'll say implementation of our clinical trial diversity initiatives.
Great. Cassie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Ricky, for having me. My name is Cassandra Smith. I'm from Amgen. I sit on the advocacy relations team, but focused on enterprise health equity. So there is a dedicated team at Amgen that works on diversifying clinical trials, but health equity and diversifying clinical trials is health equity. So I work really, really closely with that team. That is my background prior to coming to Amgen. So really excited to join in the conversation today.
Right. Z.
Hi, my name is Jeanette Harper. You can call me Z. I'm a non-clinical breast cancer navigator in a safety net institution, healthcare system. I'm also a public health commissioner, and we are trying to get cancer control education within our public health department, and a community health educator with Umoja Health Partners.
Great. Annabella.
Hi, Ricky. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Ricky. I am Annabella, and I work on President Biden's Cancer Moonshot. The President and First Lady reignited the Cancer Moonshot to end cancer as we know it, and we can't achieve that audacious goal without the folks who are on this call, Ricky, the work that we've done with you in touch. So really privileged to be part of this conversation.
So glad you're here. And last but not least of all, my partner in crime, Val.
Hi, everyone. I'm Valerie Worthy, a 25-year breast cancer survivor. I'm a nurse and also a navigator at a cancer center. I'm so happy and excited about this day.
Great. So let's jump right in, you guys. You know, we're all doing pieces of this work, and I really wanted to talk about success stories. And, you know, we call them the Black cancers, but, you know, we're working all in all these cancers. But like, what is working? You know, we know that the numbers are not looking good right now for participation. And I think we're all kind of putting our hat in the ring to figure out what we can be doing better and what we're doing to, you know, we're doing a lot of work with you guys to do this. But what do you think, what do you think is working best for you? And what is sort of how you're defining the problem? So if we look back and think the FDA is kind of mandating that you pharma people, right, develop these plans for how to do better with getting diversity. But what's working? Like, what do you feel good about in this space? Or what do you feel like it's not working? But let's start with like, what do you feel good about and where you feel like you're making some impact? Anyone?
Well, if I can, being the non-clinical navigator, breast cancer navigator, I will say there's been a paradigm shift. I do a lot of work within the community, and there's always a fear. And I believe this. I've heard it from my patients, and I started changing the conversation, being that when we hear clinical trials, we think tribulation, especially in the faith-based community where so many of our events are held in partnership with different faith-based organizations and other different CBOs. When we think about where our patients are, our most vulnerable patients are situated, they're usually at the lower rung of socioeconomics, and they tend to be people of faith. So that association is almost like automatic. You hear trial, you think tribulation. Tribulation is like an additional worry or concern that they're already adding to a life that's filled with tribulation, whether that be the tribulation of having cancer. You may be on the precipice of homelessness. So that's an additional problem. Compounding the problem is that they don't have the support going through their regular cancer treatment. So the idea of taking on something else, they're already dissuaded. When I talk about clinical trials, I don't call it a clinical trial. I call it an investment in hope. When I start presenting it as something that is hopeful, something that speaks to what you all were just referencing about seeing another day, being able to resume the chasing of your dreams, being able to do all the things that you would not be able to do without investing in that hope. There's an ease. And because there are better supports around clinical trials as opposed to most standard care of treatment plans, there's a sigh of relief and there's a greater acceptance, because now I'm speaking to them personally. I'm not a representative of the pharmaceutical. I'm speaking about this as being an investment in hope. The pharmaceutical company is investing in you as opposed to experimenting on you. And I think that's the unspoken message that is being received. And having taken out that phraseology of clinical trials, I can totally see that there's a greater acceptance and even talking about it. So that's what's working for me.
We love that. Love that. And Val actually used to calls it the hope pill. Go ahead, Annabella. Yeah. I love that.
Well, it's going to be very difficult to follow up Z, who every day is making a difference in people's lives. But I do want to just highlight for this group and for our listeners that prior to some of the work that the Cancer Moonshot led, thanks to the President and First Lady, to make navigation services a reimbursable service, navigation was not always paid for, which left that critical service out of reach of low resource communities, the people who we think, and the scholarship shows, need these services the most. So I want to say that the other thing I think Z started to say this, I heard this from some of the earlier speakers, we are shifting to understanding, recognizing, and starting to address that these non-medical factors have a huge impact on medical outcomes in standard of care treatment and in clinical trials, and making sure that someone's role and their time is respected and paid for to sit down with an individual to discuss their care, including participation in clinical research or a clinical trial, is so fundamentally important. And I am grateful to have been part of the work that led to net 6 new insurance codes that can be used to cover critical navigation services. So I want to make sure that I put that one in there too, since we are joined by the heroes who are the navigators doing this work every day.
Yeah, and Karen joined us. We'll come right back to you to introduce yourself, my lovey. But Val, do you want to speak to the navigation thing and kind of what we're doing in Amy?
Absolutely. But, I want to talk about, go back to Z's point. So I think in order to get someone enrolled in clinical trials, it has to start almost a conversation before you're diagnosed with a cancer. And so going out into the community and talking about clinical trials in a way that people understand it, normalizing it, asking people if they've taken Advil or Tylenol or any of those, and they would say, yeah, of course. Well, all of those had to be on a clinical trial. And then explaining to them the average person that's on those trials and how those trials are then, the doses are determined by the height and weight of the average person that's involved. And when I begin those conversations with people, it's, I didn't know that. So I do need to re-examine the reasons why I think a clinical trial was bad. And people, honestly, when you normalize it, they understand it a little bit better. So then we move into the cancer center site when someone's diagnosed with a cancer. If we're going to get more people on a clinical trial, there has to be a dedicated person that when that person walks across that threshold, there is someone there to meet them, to talk to them about the clinical trial. And then for us, African-American people, we are people of witness. So we like to see someone else that has survived the cancer and it has gone through a clinical trial. So I think in the cancer center, we miss opportunities to use people that have successfully gone through a clinical trial, get them to come back and talk to that patient who's newly diagnosed, who's contemplating a clinical trial, and just the evidence of that person being alive and looking well, I think is pretty convincing. So hopefully cancer centers will engage their patients and allow them to become advocates, and that'll move the needle a long way.
I mean, Valerie, I had a question about the cross-cultural communication, which is a very important point. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Cross-cultural communication. Well, I just believe that in any situation, you have to speak the language of that person. And if you can't, I mean, you can have elaborate descriptions, but if the person is not understanding what you're saying, then we're not getting our messages across. And so you have to be culturally sensitive to whomever you are talking to about clinical trials and understanding all of the past history that comes along with that person. And so for me, being able to talk to people about, I know that there's a fear. I understand Tuskegee. I understand Henrietta Lacks. It makes a difference. You have to start out baseline, understanding the fears that that person has, and then you can move on to the next step. Is that kind of a answer that question?
Yeah, because what we're having is that even when you communicate from standpoint of breast cancer, then there's prostate cancer, because really, like that you don't hear anything about prostate cancer. Prostate cancer, kind of to a certain extent, is like a stepchild, and you don't hear anything. So, but we worked with you in the past, so to kind of help effectively communicate and the importance of educational material. Did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, telling your story, yeah, and the relationships between the cancers make a difference. Because I think that if I'm advocating as a breast cancer survivor, the onus is on me to advocate for all cancers that really impact our community. And so when I say I'm a 25-year breast cancer survivor, but now I have to talk to my brother because that predisposes him to prostate cancer. So all of this is familiar. And so we need to have these conversations.
Yeah.
That's why we have poster children like my bestie Karen.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
I'm a little torn today. I'm happy. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy that and privileged that you guys are here on Clinical Trials Day. I'm a stage 4 triple negative breast cancer survivor. In 2017, a clinical trial saved my life. I have to be extremely transparent in that it was a clinical trial that was not focused specifically on breast cancer. And because of that, my views on the importance of precision oncology and how you use that in conjunction with the right trial for the right person. I'm a stickler for that. I'm always going to, when I talk to patients as the one-on-ones that I do, as far as Karen Club, before we even have the conversation about clinical trials, I'm always trying to help them quantify and compartmentalize the history of themselves and their journey and their medical history and why the trial is right for them. If the doctor cannot quantify with science why the trial is right for them, then there's a problem. There's an inherent problem. And so when I say I'm a little torn, because I'm a fan of research, a huge fan of research. And shout out to Katie Richardson. She's a patient advocate on Twitter, and I follow her because she's one of those patient advocates that's really entrenched in research. And she provided me with some information, and of course it was the FDA drug trial snapshot summary for 2023. And I said, well, let me take a look at that before I come to this meeting today, right? And when I looked at it, it's disheartening. When I look at, there are 55 novel drugs that were approved in 2023. And this report is specifically used, right, to provide us with a snapshot of the diversity in clinical trials. Right. And when I look at the 3 drugs that were approved for breast cancer, and there are a lot of other drugs, right? And of course, there were drugs approved for autoimmune, infectious diseases, neurological diseases. But I was like, let me focus in on the breast cancer drugs. The first drug, I think, is TrueQuap. There were 708 participants. 57.5% were white. 1.1% were Black. 26.7% were Asian. And 8.8% were white. I can go down the line here, but I won't. And again, when I look at these, there's one figure here. It's TrueQuap. I might be mispronouncing it, but there were 1,107 patients that participated. 50.5% were white, 1.8% were Black, 43% were Asian, and 3.1% were Hispanic. When I think about that, it's very disheartening. It's very disheartening because I know that this report, right, reflects 2023. And in 2020, there was a lot of money put in, the DEI and the equity. There was a lot of money put into awareness. There was a lot. And this, when I think about these numbers, right, that I have here, I think about it being systemic. This is more than social economic. These numbers that the FDA has put in this snapshot report, this represents way more than, you know, the social economic issues or a doctor not providing a referral.
Right.
There's a problem here, and it's bigger than, you know, bigger than I think most of us have admitted. That systematically, the system is set up that these numbers are what they are, and it's very sad and disheartening because again, our clinical trial, I would not be here if a clinical trial had not saved my life. If I had not had access to those tools, I had to fight to get them, but they were there. And I think there's a huge gap here. And I was with Ricky at the White House. They were very honest and transparent about their inability to be able to move the needle. And I think there's a bigger problem here that hasn't really been addressed.
And it will get worse as we go international, because now the pool of people that you have access to is global. So if we're 1% now, then we will not, the needle will not improve if we're not talking about it and making sure there are guidelines for our multicultural society in the United States.
If I may, I'm sorry. A lot of that, I believe, is because the people that are most vulnerable are in safety net institutions, and there is no investment, okay, in public and county hospitals, okay, that are all on Martin Luther King Boulevard. So the investment is different. You even can look at the payer system. You can look at the Medi-Cal reimbursement rates, and that absolutely is structural. So what I would say is even though the population may be overseas to a large extent, our ability to address these inequities within our own Medi-Cal systems is still here. I don't have to go to France to address what's happening with my Medi-Cal system here in the United States of America. Right. And I feel as though that's where there's a disconnect. Nobody really tackles this legislatively with the, I don't even know how to put it. It's so unwieldy. Our Medi-Cal systems are so unwieldy because they differ from state to state. You have the federal, and then that's a whole nother bondoogle. But we need to have something that is dedicated to actually restructuring and reorganizing our payment systems, because that will help determine how much more investment we can make into making sure that this is standard of procedure.
Yeah.
And because county hospitals are not paid the same, they're not valued the same, because the people that go there aren't valued the same. This is an outcome. But in order to try to bring some hope to this situation, I was blessed and fortunate, and I love you, Karen, to attend the Mayo Clinic, the Science of Community Outreach and Office of Engagement conference that they had in Jacksonville, Florida. And it was a consortium of community Office of Engagement centers with comprehensive cancer centers from across the United States that are all Black led. And it was the most incredible experience I had, because it showed me that even though this may look dire, there's definitely a ray of hope that is increasing. I was fortunate that Ricky was there. So Karen, try not to, it's discouraging, but it's not without progress. It's just that it hasn't become
not fast enough. That's not fast enough. I think Cassie wanted to chime in here.
Yeah.
Yes, and I want to add to that to say I like the way you handled it, that it's discouraging, but it's not without progress, because I'm actually hopeful. I'm a clinical trialist by profession, so I remember 2006 was when I started dealing with this issue with the FDA, when we would submit our clinical study reports to them for pre-market approvals. And they'll send it back to us and tell us, well, you don't have a good representation of marginalized or underrepresented populations in your trials. Try to do something about it. Then the approach was study by study, right? Company by company. Now we're all talking about it now because there's a guidance out that now requires that we take a look holistically through the industry how we are addressing this issue. Another sad incident, COVID-19, right? I remember when I started in my profession, if I told anyone I was a clinical researcher, I had to explain what I meant by that. It wasn't something that people understood immediately, but COVID-19 shed a light on what the enterprise is all about and the benefit. And now when we meet people and we talk about clinical trials, you have to deal with the trust issue, don't get me wrong, but it's not a foreign concept anymore. So to me, we're moving the needle. Do we need to move it in a larger way? Yes. And I believe this is why many of my peers from the industry are here, willing and able to talk about all the different actions that we are all taking to ensure that we are closing this gap, especially the large gap when it comes to enrolling Black patients in our clinical trials.
Yeah.
And I'll just say for a minute now, not to take the time from others, that at AstraZeneca, we decided to go forward with a science-led, data-driven approach. First, we did a research just to understand the barriers and opportunities for enrolling diverse participants, and we definitely look at Black patients in our clinical trials. And then the outcomes, the insights generated from that research now drive many of the actions we are taking in terms of how we are engaging with sites, community organizations, diverse investigators, or even what we're doing internally in supporting our clinical teams to help them meet their goals in the diversity action plans. So I have hope, and I'd like to close with that.
So
Yeah,
just
and I'd like to add. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I'd like to add to that too, coming from Voice of Industry, because I'm going to go back maybe to Ricky's question, and I do think there is hope, Kimmy, as you said, but I also think there's action that we're still building momentum. We've been talking for a long time. I remember too talking about this back in 2000. I think it was 2006. And we've been, in a grassroots way, industry has been kind of plodding along and pulling back and moving forward. And to your point, there is this guidance now that's going to change behaviors. I have no doubt about it. But back to Ricky's question about hope and about, what's working well and what are we excited about? One of the things that I am very much so excited about is industry has the opportunity to engage in a way that's person-centered, right? Not patient-centered per se, but person, just honoring a person as a person, honoring their disease, of course, and what that means with their patient experience. But I don't think we've done that in the past. Like I remember, this is back in like the early 2000s again. I remember wanting to say thank you, like issue a little postcard at the conclusion of our clinical trials. This was not Amgen, this was another company. But to, just say thank you for, participating, volunteering, taking time off from work and away from your family, et cetera. And I got pushback. We got pushback from compliance. Like, what do you need to say thank you for? And I remember sitting in that meeting, like, okay, what, just on a human level, on a person level, what are we saying here, right? And so I think what I've seen over time, I've been in this industry, I'm a baby, but close to 25 years at this point. And I remember those days where it was, we industry, we put the studies, out, the patients line up to come see us. And that's actually not the right mindset, but that's actually not true either with all of the competition too for patients to get into your study. So I'm hopeful, to answer this, Ricky, that industry is taking a different approach in honoring people and patients, right? And their journeys and what it means for them to participate in our studies. I think as Z started the conversation talking about understanding the nuance when you talk to people, trials, well, that sets perhaps the wrong message from the beginning, right? There's just different ways that we can engage that I think are going to move the needle over time. And community engagement is one of the things that I personally think it's not the savior, because, as Karen and others have said, it's a systemic and very layered issue. But I do think connecting with communities authentically and consistently is going to change some of the hardship I think that we've seen over time. So I just wanted to go back to what I've seen changing from the industry perspective. It is, I'm hopeful for that.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Encouraged by that.
Can I ask you a question? Then, if that's the case, do you see that industry is seeing the role of the advocacy organization in a different light? So, at one time, we were at the kitty table. So, you think we're coming to the dinner table?
Yeah, I do. But I'll say this.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Ricky.
Go ahead.
I was going to say I do. I absolutely think so. But what I also think is important is that industry, I'm generalizing. People don't really know what to do with advocacy. They really don't. Like, they don't know the benefit of advocacy organizations and what, how we can partner on really reaching community, reaching the populations that we're all trying to reach. So I think you have to have a good advocacy team. Shout out to Amgen's advocacy team, because I think we do a really good job with it, but really understanding the role that advocacy plays in kind of connecting the community to the organization. So I think we're getting there, but I don't think people really know. It's funny, I wanted to give a talk on that at some point, the role of patient advocacy groups in partnership with industry, I think. And Keith, I was going to tap you for that, but I think it's important to talk about how we could work together.
If I may, I'm sorry, you guys. But from the community perspective, it's not just connecting the community with the organization, it's connecting the community with progress. And so to Karen's point, one of the main differences between the way cancer research and COVID research was done is urgency. It didn't take 18 years to come up with, I don't know how many different COVID vaccines. I didn't even know which one to take. I was so confused in how many doses. We still working on trying to get some trials developed for cancers that have been around forever. And these are messages that are nonverbal, but they are received. And I think that there has to be an awareness when we go into these communities. We don't have to go back to Henrietta Lacks. People are literally going back to COVID, saying cancer kills the same way COVID did. Cancer put a lot of businesses under because the entrepreneurial spirit was severely impacted because there was no revenue generation. But we have cancer patients that own businesses too. So when you take a look at this is about life from the patient's perspective. And they take in consideration all the things that impact their lives, whether it's the diagnosis of the disease or how and to what extent it is invested in. So our conversation, for me as an advocate, I have to take all of those things not under consideration, but I have to be respectful. I have to receive that. So when I speak to what it is that the pharmaceutical is investing in, I can speak to each and every one of those things that impact their lives, because otherwise there's a suspicion that they won't be supported. Mm-hmm. And that it's about profit and not purpose.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. And I feel like an example of that too is, I feel like Amy and Genentech invited us to the big table, Keith, to your point, and invited us and said, we realize something's not right here. And we think we need to have nurse navigation or navigation as a thing. And so I think, you could speak to
Sure.
How we became friends.
Yeah, it is one of the best friendships I've ever had. I think I hope I can tie some of these ideas together, because the conversation has been tremendous. But Ricky, you asked us what have we done well? We have a trial that we have literally thrown almost everything at. Because we have a very aggressive diversity plan. We've achieved the goal that we have based on the prevalence of HR positive disease in this particular trial. We have 11.5% of our women are Black women. We have literally thrown everything at it, and without the relationship that we have with Ricky and Val and all of Touch, helping us with, which are the sites we should be in. We can go to the big academic centers, and we can do that every day, all day for the 25 years, but that's not where the patients always are. And Ricky, I think last time we saw each other, you said to me, these are the places where these women are being treated. These are the sites you need to be in. And we listen really hard to your advice. We listen really hard to your advice on the materials that we use to educate patients on their disease. we don't get the imagery right. You know, we don't get the words right. We don't get a lot of things right until we come talk to you and have you read and show us and tell us in your beautiful, brutal honesty that, you know, what we should and should not be doing. And I mean, I listen to you. I believe in everything that you say in this navigation program, Val, that we have. You know, we had to start somewhere, right? We're not there yet. We know that, but we had to start. We had to stop talking about it and just start doing it, because we talked about it for probably 18 months. And finally, we just launched it September of 2023. And I think it answers the problem that us in industry have, which is that we are at an arm's length away from the patients. We can't talk to them. We can't touch them. We can't give them hugs. We can't do anything like that. But we can, through you and patient navigation, in the context of a clinical trial, patient navigation in the context of a clinical trial gets paid for. And we have people that we can put in place so that patients know that, you know, if they want some non-medical advice, if they need help talking to their family about what a clinical trial means before they say no to it, you know, that's what navigation means for us. It serves an enormous purpose when we can't get to the patient in the ways that we want to. So I am grateful for advocates. I am grateful for the patients who help us reach each other. It's all about those connections. And I'm grateful for all the advice we've gotten from you guys to make the clinical trial that we have successful in some small way, just starting to meet those targets.
I remember the first creative you showed me. I was like, oh my God.
Right. I know. It's yeah, we have white people working on these things and it doesn't work.
And talking about the small things, I just want to share an example. We were getting feedback from community members on one of our materials, and someone told us once a day, once in Spanish means 11. And we had once a day all over the content, and no one realized that this could totally be misunderstood in another language. So that's the level of detail we often just overlook because we're so wired and doing things a certain way. And it's really opening up mindsets, and that is what I'm truly hopeful about. Just continuing on trends we're seeing. At this year's AACR is a very big research conference in cancer care, American Association of Cancer Research. And at this, and it's mostly scientists and researchers who come here and share about, you know, what's the next big thing happening in oncology. And at this year's conference, I saw so many posters from faith-based institutions. There were like pastors and Fen, one of your partners, Tom, one of your partners from Fen was there. And there were so many community members talking about the power of community engagement at a research conference, at a global research conference. And this to me was a clear indication that there is interest. There's a huge appetite. Kudos to these folks for coming in and challenging scientists, and they were being heard. And so this will take time, but super encouraging to see what's happening. And also going back to the role of, I had patient engagement, and I've been part of this journey for a long time. And more and more people are talking about community partners, community engagement, caregivers. These words were unheard of in the patient advocacy space. So it will take time. Ultimately, we need to impact those numbers you're seeing, Karen, in the report. But I'm pretty confident it will happen. It's going to take time. I think these studies, which were reported, probably started a year or 2 years ago, when we were not that aware. But just from the energy on this webinar, and all the efforts we're taking, I would find it hard to believe we don't move the needle at some point.
So, Pooja, to your point of being hopeful, to Ricky's point of the table, I'll be at ASCO in a couple of days. That's where all the oncologists show up from all around the world. And I reached out to several, and they've like, Karen, come have a conversation, the Black oncologists, because they are specifically talking about building their own table, about making sure that the patients that they are taking care of have the knowledge they need to have to be able to make an informed decision. I'm really excited and really hopeful because I like to see, medical individuals, people in that part of the industry, not, just leaving the burden on the patient and taking the reins and saying, you know what, this is my community. I'm a Black oncologist. This is how we're going to take it to the patients and making sure that they can make informed decisions about clinical trials. So I'm really looking forward to meeting with them and having conversations and to bring that information back to my community because I really think it's important. I think it's going to take a multitude of different entities in the industry in order to be able to bring these horrific numbers about.
Yeah, I know Keith and Val and I are part of a cancer grant challenge with Morehouse School of Medicine now, Project Standby, where we're basically going to be in 14 sites doing a biological study on, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, and breast cancer. And it's the first time, first of all, they've had a Black researcher do this work, Melissa Davis, and she couldn't be with us today. But also, it's the first time they've actually had patient advocacy as part of the work pattern. And so they've never done this before. I'm actually doing a presentation to them on Wednesday, but they've had patient advocates involved in research for years, but they've never made it part of the actual research and funded it. So we're really excited and hopeful to do this work and try to make a difference. So we're seeing the light, but we just can't, it's never fast enough for me. I'm just opinion. But
yeah, there was one other question about, to go back a little bit, this concept of structure. So a lot of people say social determinants of health. I don't use that. I use structural determinants of health. There's a structural component that sometimes gets overlooked, and it is the clinical trial site. Because the clinical trial, once we navigate, and Val will let you know, and same thing on my end, we can get the patients to the clinical trial site, and somehow the IRB is too long or some kind of logistical problem exists as they go through the process. And so that's why the navigators are so important, because we're just not just here, rah, rah, cheer, cheer, which we're there, and we're there after you get them to the door. I had to tell a patient, a potential patient for a clinical trial, that some of his data, how they recorded it in the chart, was wrong. Because of that would prevent him in the future to participate in the clinical trial. Just those simple subtleties, having the patient correct medical information, interferes with whether or not, well, he's not very active. What do you mean he's not very active? ECOG number says he's 4, but he's a 1 when you see. So something that simple is logistically what takes place in the sites. And also, I'm just letting you know that the clinical trial sites need to be much more cross-culturally competent, because they are not. And people are just feeling as if, I think, like you said before, it's like, well, why do I need to tell them thank you? Like, this navigator does not drop them off at the front door. And we're not a group of people who are 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock at night. Right. And we're also work on the weekends.
Right. Well, we're 24/7 with our touch care, right? Yeah.
I wanted to touch on that as well.
It's important to recognize that we're always on call for folks.
Always.
Yeah. Exactly. And I was going to add, I'm glad you brought that up, because when you think about the fact that we talked about going into the communities and building trust, in a sustainable long-term manner, right? Then that means you drive up awareness about trial participations, and then, people get interested. And then let's say we have the patient navigators, and I completely believe that patient advocacy and patient navigation are critical to a clinical trial participant's success in a trial, right? So you get them in the mix as well, advising and guiding the patients. And then if you forget to think about how do we build capabilities within the sites themselves to uplift their clinical trial diversity capabilities, sometimes that's where the leaks come in, right? Because they're not ready to deal with the influx of patients coming to them, or they don't even have the tools appropriate to have the culturally competent conversations around what the patient needs. So that's another area that we in the industry we're tackling now, is figuring out the needs within this clinical trial sites that would help them engage more diverse participants. What solutions do you build in there? And at the same time, what support or connection do they need with the academic medical center, maybe to help uplift their clinical research capability? And the industry, and AZ being one of them, AstraZeneca, is working within that mix of helping our sites. And then at the end of it, and I want to go back to Valerie's point, And at the end of the day, then we want to be able to come back and say thank you to everyone, right? The patients, the sites, the communities. That's how we return that value back to the people we're serving.
Good. I knew this time would go by so fast. So I want everybody to give like a parting word because we're all here and I'm so grateful that you guys are doing this with us. And everyone said, Ricky, how can you do like 3 hours? Well, look how fast. But I know it's, but I mean, you're all my friends. And I'm so happy to be here. But anyone want to everybody give some parting words real quick.
We just got to keep working together. Oh, I'm so sorry, Annabella.
Go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
I just want to say we just got to keep working together, us in industry, us with you, us all together, because there's still lots of problems to solve, and I think we can do it if we stick together.
Thank you.
I would just plus one something that Karen, it's so good to see you again, was saying in terms of ensuring that our healthcare workforce reflects the patient populations that we are intended to serve, because the scholarship shows that those outcomes are better. So that would be an area. I mean, to Dr. Crawford's point about structural factors, if we can make sure that the future of healthcare is led by traditionally underrepresented groups, I can't wait to see what that will look like.
So cool. I went to Morehouse School, medical school graduation on Saturday. My goddaughter graduated, and they graduated 68 kids. 50 of them were Black women. You go.
Nice.
It was so high.
You know what I'm going to say? I'm not going to say anything.
I know. You can say nothing. You can say nothing. You can say nothing.
It's going to get worse for Black men.
Yeah. We got to get enough.
From the standpoint of being educated and graduating, because we feel that from the standpoint of prostate cancer, it's just not something that it's comfortably or effectively being communicated. But I do so. I'm glad there's a whole bunch of new Black ladies who are going to be doctors
coming out there doing their thing. Yeah. Pooja, any parting words?
I just thought it takes a village, clearly, from this conversation. And as Amy said, let's keep going and let's do this together. There's no reason for us not to join forces and make this change happen together. Thanks, Ricky, for leading this, and hope we can have many more of these amazing conversations where we can share a lot more successes as we move forward.
We're doing it again in December, so
absolutely.
Yeah, I think just adding to what everybody said, but just a special note, I think, for those of us on the industry side to just continue to press forward to what we know is right. It is hard. It is heavy. We oftentimes don't get to do all the things we want to, but just continue to press on. And, thank you to all of the advocates and the navigators. We really can't, do this without you. So just thank you for all of that.
Karen, my girlie.
I will say that I just want to really reiterate the fact that we need more Black doctors, invest in our communities, invest in our young, thriving, curious scientists that are waiting in the wings, and just say support, invest in Black doctors.
Yeah, awesome. Z?
This isn't pharmaceutical work, it's purpose-driven work. And we are all here because we are driven by that purpose of making sure that there is improvement across the board. So that's what I would say. Don't think about this in the framework of a pharmaceutical company or anything like that. Try to think about it just being purposeful work, purpose-driven work that's impactful, that's meaningful. The pharmaceutical is a vehicle. It can never, ever, ever be the impetus. Because if that happens, we will always have a reason why it can't happen. So I just want to thank you all for your commitment and your dedication. It's a blessing and a privilege to be seated here with you. Karen, I love you.
I love you too.
Mic drop, right? So thank you so much, you guys. Thank you so much. And stay tuned, everybody. We're going to have a little recap, and then we're going to bring on our next panel of awesome people. But you guys have been phenomenal. I'm so grateful.
Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you very much.
Take care. So wow, guys, that was a pretty good start, right?
That was a great start.
Can you put Val back on, Asia? Yeah.
You know what I wanted to say? It's interesting. If you look at the history of medicine and and bear with me because you know I'm old.
I'm older than you. We know that, but it's okay.
Okay, Miss. Okay, beauty and brains before me. Okay, so historically, doctors were men, and it wasn't until women became doctors that it's almost you brought in humanity into medicine.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so now look at this. In the past, pharmaceutical companies did not have this advocacy group, not us.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to remember that the pharmaceutical companies have a whole advocacy organization. And it's like they are bringing humanity into the pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting concept that they never existed or they played such a superficial role in the past. And now we're having these type of discussions as we're part of the team, the advocacy team for all these organizations. So it's just something that kind of struck me at the end.
And they're all relying on us, which is great. I mean, I feel good that we could even bring them to the table today together. You know, I mean, I don't think it's often that all different pharma companies come into the same room, maybe at these conventions, but never like have this forced conversation where we're putting pressure on them and like, okay, bring it, you guys. So I'm so grateful that they're even allowing this conversation to happen and be a part of it, you know, and I think we're blessed to have this relationship with them. So that's a good thing.
But you see what happened? All of them are like-minded. All of them are advocacy. That's activity.
Yes.
It's researchers from each one of the pharmaceutical companies together. It's the advocacy, the heart of these companies.
The heart.
Working with us, the heart, or that transition between the patient. So it's an interesting concept, and I'm glad you were able to bring these groups together.
Yeah.
Yes,
and it almost normalizes. I mean, when we think about pharma, me as a nurse thinking about pharmaceutical companies, it was almost an abstract, and then to meet, the Amy's of the world, it really did normalize, the pharmaceutical company. Yeah. And then I tell you what warmed my heart this week, my church had a conference, and this was all during the day. And then at night, they had a Black doctor talk about melanoma and clinical trials. I mean, it blew people away. I mean, because now you understand this is what you have to do to engage the community. So maybe you can't have a separate event because people won't show up. But if you have a musical conference or some kind of church conference and infuse that in for 15, 20 minutes, hey, people are complicated.
Sneak in the health, sneak in the science, right?
Yes. That's what we have to do. We got to do that.
Yeah, and that's why when we trial is working, because we're not going to health fairs, Val. We're going to the beauty shows. I had the Hair Ubiquitous call me today. Are you coming? Because we're trying to get women when they're not thinking about health. And then you see it in and they're like, whoa, I should have.
I've got it in all my churches, in North Carolina, because they love the When We Try video.
Yeah.
But and that's the way we're going to have to catch some people. And in fact, pastors know that their member has cancer before sometimes a family member shares it with the family. So
and so kids, we approach it a little bit differently, but we're still into the church, because the idea is we basically set up a portal for every church. So every church in the United States, our objective is to sign them up under a cancer portal. So all educational equipment, all educational material, everything flows to them, because you have to recognize that, touch is the curator of all medical information, not Dr. Google.
Right. Not Dr. Google.
Because you don't need to go to Dr. Google and try to figure out what's the right thing to do about
That's right.
Wow. You just need to go to touch.
That's why we're here.
You need to go to spin. And once you can trust that not only are we going to give you some, think about it. They want the patient to participate in the shared decision-making process.
Right.
I said, at least when we were in college, we had a syllabus. And we knew the chapters they wanted us to read, which we never read. But just gonna say, you're gonna, oh, by the way, you have cancer, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. Dr. Crawford, just to like highlight your point about the need for Black doctors and women doctors. I mean, when Black doctors aren't doctors, they're also, you know, they're the aunts, they're the cousins, they're brothers and sisters. So even when they're not in the doctor's office, they're able to talk to their relatives, talk to their community members about it.
I love it.
I mean, maybe only 5.7% of doctors are Black, so it's definitely necessary that there's a greater push for HCPs who are Black, who can translate information properly.
And then to tag on to that, greater push for HCPs, period. Because you know what's happening is the nurse practitioner is in the rural America.
They're the doctor.
You have a healthcare provider that can see you and write scripts and do procedures.
Right.
Because all the doctors are kind of in the urban sector.
That's right.
And so, but when you're talking about outside, it's primarily nurse practitioners, and we have to then embrace those healthcare providers also.
Exactly.
They have to be part of the discussion.
Right.
And what's interesting about clinical trials too is yes, they're docs, but also we need to really make sure that the sponsors help Black be created.
Yes. This
Repeat
is why I'm
that
so-
now.
Black clinical trial sites.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you think about Mississippi. Come on now.
Yeah.
Well, let me explain. I don't think Mississippi has a cancer.
An NCI. I don't think they have an NCI designated cancer.
Oh no, it's only 43 in the, was it 33 or 43 in the whole United States? So.
Yeah. So we still have a lot of work to do, but I'm encouraged by our pharma partners just stepping up to the plate and even trying to go beyond what the FDA is requiring of them, because frankly, I don't think the FDA even knows what to ask of them, you know. So I think for them to be open-minded and talk to us and give us a seat at the table. And I do feel like we have one. I mean, I feel like values, you know.
Yeah.
And what do you think? And, you know.
Yeah, I think it's great. And I also wanted to mention, you know, blackdoctor.org. We have a clinical trials resource center that we welcome either doctors or just the average consumer. If you're just watching this right now, if you're curious more about clinical trials, we keep that updated every single day with the latest news, personal stories about people who have done clinical trials. Like, we're trying to make this information as digestible for Black Americans as possible.
Yeah.
And Ricky, I still think that we have to tell people, be really honest, and Dr. Keith, tell me if I'm wrong. But once these drugs are approved, regardless whether it's 1% or 2%, you know, African American representation, when they are approved, we as Black people are on these medications. They're already approved. They're not on trial. Then we have these crazy side effects that probably aren't recorded because the trial is already closed. So my thoughts, and I say this to Ricky all the time, either we will be officially or unofficially on a clinical trial, but we will be on a trial.
And so what's interesting is that clinical studies. So say, for example, this is a clear example where you have a clinical trial that took about 7 years to complete. They didn't have enough Black men on the clinical trial.
Right.
But there was some an inkling of some kind of positive effect. It took them 7 years to collect data after the clinical trial was approved to say that not only was the drug, the therapy, a benefit to Black men, but it extended their life to a year past the general population. Wow. So you had to wait 7 years to collect data for 14 years of life.
Wow. Yeah.
Had a decade and a half had to go by before somebody could say, this is perfect for this population of people.
But that's what we need, though. That's what we need. We need to be able to say that about these drugs.
Right.
And we know Black women are dying from breast cancer because the drugs aren't working for us. I mean, the drugs didn't work for me. I had to find experimental drugs. So we know that. I mean, we know, and not for everybody, but for too many. Too many.
Yeah.
I mean, one death is too many deaths. But we need to do this work. We need to participate in trials, and we need to. And frankly, Val, you're right. You know, when you take any chemo, it's a clinical trial in your body. You hope it's going to work, but frankly, we don't have the data to support that it's going to work, and so we have to do this work. It's so important. So,
and so a lot of people also question. So there's the Tuskegee study, right?
Yeah.
And people may look at it negatively, but I got to look at it positively.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it wasn't for the Tuskegee study, then all the guidelines for medical human research
right
would not be created. Now think about it. They had the Nuremberg trials.
That's right.
And Nuremberg there's these guidelines for human research, which they didn't follow.
Right.
But until in the United States that the Tuskegee study was acknowledged, we wouldn't have these guidelines in place. And each president, majority of the presidents from 9th to 70s to now have had some kind of input. Even GW, George Bush,
mm-hmm.
Obama, and had some input in so it's a bipartisan issue.
And curating,
about making sure that there are guidelines in place that are protecting everyone, all Americans. And this is the other thing too, is this isn't just a Black thing. It's all American.
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between somebody in Appalachian America,
right,
who grew up versus somebody who grew up in Vermont,
right?
Somebody who's a farmer,
right. There's also the LGBTQ community.
Mm-hmm.
They have different stands. So I think there's so many different audiences, and so and
because I have to say this. I have to put this plug out there. Is because in the transgender community, trans women can get prostate cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And see, nobody talks about that. But
and breast.
Yeah, but the issue is I do recognize that.
Right.
But they can get it, but because of the treatments that they're on, hormone treatment,
they're putting themselves at risk.
They are. It's not at risk. But the hormones are the drugs that you use to suppress prostate cancer. Mm-hmm. So what probably happen is they're suppressing prostate cancer growth, and then when they're diagnosed, they're resistant. No, Steve, but this is speculative until data comes out. But when it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, sometimes I just got to say it's a duck. And if we don't address that, if we don't start talking to everyone about that.
Yeah.
And then the flip side is I want to tell you that trans men women have a remnant tissue very similar to the prostate. So when they start taking drugs that are then a hormone affirming therapy, you could start pushing that prostate development. So they have to be watched out for developing prostate cancer. And anytime we introduce drugs that are chronically affecting the physiology of our body, we have to be ever vigilant about that.
Yeah.
If we're going to protect all lives.
Yeah. All right, Asia's saying we got to bring on our next panel. So much work to do, but we need more science. We're ready, Asia. You going to run a video for us?
I am a stage 4 triple negative breast cancer survivor. I was one of the first people in the nation to join the trial that I did. To be able to participate in that was huge. It saved my life. The drug hasn't reached the market yet, but I'm alive. Without participating, we don't know the true efficacy. We have to participate. Research is moving forward. We don't want to be left behind.
We love our Karen. Hey, people.
Hello.
Hey, friends. So glad you're here. Thanks so much for joining us. We're so glad you're here with us. We just kind of finished our first episode, but we're so glad to have you here to talk about clinical trials, our favorite topic. So Keith and Valor and I are here, and we're so glad to see you. So let's do a quickie introductions. Everybody, you want to go first, Summer?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Summer Bazuro. I'm the Chief Medical Officer of the IPG Health Network. IPG Health is a global collective of healthcare marketing agencies. Our clients include the top 20 global pharma companies, as well as countless of startups, biotech companies, biopharma companies, and a variety of life science companies. So our clients are clinical trial sponsors. And in 2020, we launched, from our own pro bono perspective, the Trial for Clinical Equality during a time of much needed reckoning around racial injustice and health equality. And our intent was really to raise awareness about the low representation of Black Americans, Hispanic Americans in cancer clinical trials and the implications of their health outcomes.
Great. So glad you're here. Neha.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here with you. My name is Neha Shalondonio, and I am the Director of Clinical Trial Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Pfizer. It's a privilege to be here. My work in this is really a privilege and an honor, representing the voice of the historically ignored, underrepresented in clinical research, and the opportunity to have this important discussion about what Pfizer is doing and legacy partnerships that we've had together for Black Americans facing cancer is much needed on this International Clinical Trials Day.
Thank you. Lauren, we've never met. Great to meet you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Very nice to meet you. I've heard a ton about you. I've seen you speak a number of times, so I'm a little starstruck. So thank you for having me.
That's pretty scary, but
My name is Lauren Hubbard. I'm the Director of Patient Diversity at PPD Thermo Fisher. And what we do as a CRO, a contract organization, is work with various pharma companies, many that are on this call, to effectively implement strategies at a study level to ensure diversity is kind of trickling down at the study level into what we see our data roll out as. So that's our goal, is to help our sponsors really implement these and see the actual work being done at the study level.
So can you break that down for the 5-year-olds like me? Just like at the study level, meaning within a clinical trial, you are the guys that are sort of executing them, right?
Correct. You got it.
Okay. Great. Tiffany, great to meet you too.
Yes. Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Tiffany Bryce, and I'm the Director of Clinical Trial Diversity at Gilead Science. Our goal and focus is really to ensure that our drugs are available to diverse populations, and I'm so excited to be here. I can't wait to continue our conversation.
Great. Carmen, so good to see you, cutie.
Hi, so good to see you too, Ricky, and great to see Karen and Karen's video. So hi, everyone. I'm Carmen White. I'm with Pfizer Research and Development, and I work alongside Neha and a few of our other colleagues and focus on multicultural participant experience. And in that role, I work on external education and awareness and helping to increase access of clinical trials to underrepresented populations. Good to be here.
Awesome. Laura, my bestie.
Hello, my friends. I'm Laura Crandon, and I'm the founder and president of Touch for Life. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, and we focus on our signature initiative, which is Black Genes Matter, and that is educating the community about the importance of really biomarkers and genetic testing and family health history, because increasingly, as I said in the New York Times op-ed, is precision oncology and the gateway to clinical trials is knowing what your mutations are and what biomarkers you have that are present in your tumors. And not knowing that could preclude you from getting into a clinical trial in the first place, even being flagged. And so the research show that only about 37% of Black patients are even offered their genetic or genomic testing. And you might say, well, gosh, the guidelines say otherwise. That is true, but we're not getting it. And so we go out into the community where the people are and talk to them about this complex topic and make it simple, party with a purpose and other assets. We also do policy advocacy, training our community on how to advocate for the policy of coverage, whether that's for a health plan, government-sponsored insurance, or others. And then lastly, what's important to us is we go out and I speak to about 4,000, 5,000 physicians and researchers a year. I go where they are and challenge them to understand the impact of the lack of equity in this space and challenge them to be better and to make a commitment to invite us to clinical trials and order these really important tests for us so that we are in the biodata and we are in the science, so we are in the solution. That's me.
Awesome, awesome. And Doctor.
Yeah,
and your name.
All right, so think of beer and think of hooray, and it's beer.
Beer, thank you, Beer. You helped me before I blew it. So, Dr.
All
Beer.
right, so yeah, my name is Dr. Behere. I practice in Indianapolis. I'm a practicing oncologist. I'm also a clinical professor at Marion University Medical School. And I am CEO and founder of Indie Hematology Education. Indie Hematology Education is a company that's a nonprofit that is interested in promoting education amongst physicians in the space of hematologic malignancies and also for oncologists. But in addition to that, we have founded what we refer to as the DRIVE initiative, and I'll talk to you more about DRIVE later, which is our effort to promote diversity and equity in clinical research. The acronym DRIVE stands for different components of our initiative. And in fact, we just had a summit, which we call the Indianapolis Black Paper Summit, where we've talked about strategies to try to promote clinical research amongst non-persons of European descent.
Awesome. Awesome. And my blessed Sharon.
Hello, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be among all these fantastic people. My name is Sharon Rivera Sanchez. I am the CEO of Trials of Color. And basically, we educate, advocate, and give back. But one of our main goals is boots on the ground. And when you say meet people where they are, to actually go out in the field and to talk about what is a clinical trial. It's a privilege to be in a clinical trial. I believe I'm here because of a clinical trial, and try to answer some of the myths and some of the questions that they may have about barriers when it comes to clinical trial. That is one thing we do. So I won't take up that much time, but in related to this, and I'm glad to be here to have a voice on clinical trial date. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And Sharon's a blessed, and she really started talking about colon cancer because her brother died in 30 days. And so I think she's expanded her passion from breast to colon. And, we're talking about the Black cancers. Hello. Yes. Lung, colon, prostate. And Laura really works in both the prostate and breast and multiple myeloma. So let's start the conversation. And we just had a great panel. We talked about, what are you feeling good about? Like, we all keep talking about diversity in clinical trials, and we need more diversity in clinical trials. And we brought you guys together because I feel like you're walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And, let's talk about what that looks like and what you feel good about in this space. What are the opportunities? I think we're all doing a piece of this work, but I feel like, we have this village that we're all in, and we need to be working together to do more work and reach more people, because the numbers are not good. The numbers are not showing where we need to be. And in our last panel, Karen Peterson talked about the report that just came out from AACR that basically says we're getting like 1% participation. And it's just really disheartening to see that that we're not moving the needle to the extent that, I'm just an impatient pain in the ass and I want to make it better. So, I'm like, I want to be impatient about being iconic. So talk to us. What do you guys think is some of the good things we're doing that we can replicate and share and elevate?
Ricky, I'm happy to go first as a patient because, again, I believe I'm here due to a clinical trial.
Yeah.
I think what we are doing good is continue to be a voice, continue to talk about having a seat at the table and getting involved in clinical trial and research. And what do that look like? But I honestly feel like by being out in the field, taking the time to explain to a person, when you get a call, like I just got a call this week, which we all get calls all the time, and the person was just diagnosed. It took me way back to what that felt like. But I also took the opportunity to say, this should happen, this should happen, and also ask your doctor about a clinical trial. So, what we are doing good, what I feel this panel is doing, is really continue to have a conversation. Have a conversation wherever you can. Now, do you want to talk about what we're doing bad?
Yeah, go for it. Where you're missing, right? What do
Okay,
you?
where we are missing is that this is what I always hear from a lot of different organizations. Well, just hit the churches. Okay, sure, black and brown people go to church, but we do so much more than just go to church. So the church is not the only place that you can reach out to people. We have to continue to reach out, continue to be a voice. And when you say meet a person where they are, what do that mean? Exactly what do that mean? What that mean to me is an underserved neighborhood. So I go to that neighborhood and I partner with people in that neighborhood and I accept phone calls from anywhere, and I explain to them because, again, I remember how scared I was. I wouldn't tell you I was scared at that time. You couldn't even pay me to tell you I was scared. I ain't scared of nothing, but I was scared to death. So I can say to the person, are you scared? But here's what will get you through this. And how can we back up our small nonprofit as well that is out here? When I drag this inflatable colon, it's very heavy and it takes about 4 people to blow it up. But we are doing it and we don't mind doing it. So instead of saying, we meeting people where you are, what do that look like? And I can assure you, black and brown people do so much more than go to church. The church is a start, but we do so much more than go to church.
Yeah. And it's not about downstairs either, right? It's preaching to the choir.
Yeah. If I was to follow up on that, right, I would say part of the problem is that we have approached this as a problem of black and brown people.
Mm-hmm.
That is not the problem. We have to approach this from an industry perspective. Let's ask ourselves, what is the motivation of industry? The motivation of industry is to make profits. Obviously, they want to provide care for everybody, but ultimately, it's about profit.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I think we ought to be looking at this is much more comprehensive. All of us can stand on top of the mountaintop and scream and holler and all of that. And frankly, it's not going to change anything. But we can hold everyone's feet to the fire by the approaches that we've proposed through our DRIVE initiative. So the D for our DRIVE initiative refers to that every clinical trial ought to have a diversity officer.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why clinical trials have a thing we call data safety monitoring boards, which means that when a study is being done, the study is designed and monitored. And if the study is inherently unsafe, the study is stopped. There is an independent committee that's different from the investigators that does that. If you have a diversity officer that has the same kind of gravitas within a clinical research organization, currently, as you know, the Fedora Act was passed, which is meant to encourage pharmaceutical companies and sponsors to develop diversity plans. But there isn't a mechanism for policing it. So it's nothing but a piece of paper that is worth nothing. Whereas if you have a diversity officer and the diversity officer can truly hold the feet of studies to the fire and say, well, this is the plan, this is how you're going to do it. And in the course of the study is monitored, and the study is then determined to either meeting those goals or not meeting those goals and adjusting during the course of the trial. You will not never going to get there. But the other thing that's most important, I think, is that studies should be ranked for diversity. That should be published. So when you are looking at a study as a consumer, if you're a patient and I prescribe a drug X for the treatment of your cancer, it should be immediately apparent to you how many people like you were in the study that this drug is based on. If you knew that information and everybody knew that information and that kind of information was used to push, it will make a difference. That is the R in our drive. Studies ought to be ranked so that everyone should know what the rank of each study is. And I'll talk more about it, but I'm going to be quiet for now.
If I could just add something about cost on that point, Ricky, and to everyone on this panel. The latest campaign we have on Trial for Clinical Diversity is all focused on that, because that's the thing that people usually say is the reason why we should not have diverse clinical trials. But yet, according to data published by the National Academy of Sciences in 2020, the opposite is in fact true. So this was an economic analysis called the Future Elderly Model, and they measured three things: life expectancy, disability-free life, and the years in the labor force. And that analysis showed that without adequate representation in clinical trials, the amount of life expectancy, disability-free life, and years in the labor force that Black and Hispanic Americans lose equates to hundreds of billions of dollars. So it actually costs us more to have a lack of diversity in clinical trials, because underrepresented groups are left to get sicker and therefore less able to contribute to their families, their communities, and the overall economy. So just want to dispel that one, because that's one we hear over and over again. And then there's another important study conducted by Dr. Marcella Alson at Harvard. And again, in the Economic Quarterly Journal, showed that physicians who treat Black patients, for example, are less likely to prescribe medicines that were approved with inadequate representation, and that their Black patients are then less likely to take those medications even when prescribed. So that has a direct impact on the clinical trial sponsor's financial bottom line. So all in all, the opposite is true, that when you actually look at the data, so it doesn't slow down research, it doesn't cost more. A lack of representation in clinical trials will end up costing us all more.
And in fact, if there are adverse reactions because of a drug that's not studied in people of color, and those people have more adverse reactions, guess what? Everyone is going to pay for it. So It's not just the minority patients, but even the majority patients are going to pay for the cost of that.
Wow.
If I can add, I think one thing that we are doing well is understanding now that sustained community engagement is the most effective tool to not only keeping patients interested in studies, keeping them on studies, but also building up the trust that we so urgently need. I think that's also our biggest pain point, is that we aren't investing in sustained community engagement adequately enough or at the right times. We're only thinking about it when we are looking for recruitment for patients, as opposed to thinking about it as a part of the program for what we need for this molecule to be effectively seen by all patients and have an adequate representation. So I do think that's one thing that we're recognizing and doing well, but also one thing that's still a pain point for us is our sustained community engagement with communities of color.
Why do you think that is, though? Why do you think industry is not willing to pay, or sponsors are not willing to pay for that?
I think it's new. And they're risk averse. I think there's not a lot of evidence from pharma clinical trials. There's a ton of evidence out there that shows that sustained community engagement is effective, but not in our pharma trials at that level. So there's a risk averse feeling that I perceive. And so it's many companies are pushing forward and taking that risk, but many are still a little scared.
Yeah, and I want to say that
is this in the oncology space, or is this generally speaking about clinical trials?
I think it's both.
Because I do think that there are pharmaceutical companies out there that have past 5-6 years have really stepped up their game
Totally.
and have large advocacy organizations. Yeah, there's a feeling of the bottom line is the dollar, but they're beginning to do more. I wanted to comment on this thing about the guidelines that were published by the FDA. They're just guidelines. You can't enforce them, and there's no teeth. So really, there's no loss to the pharmaceutical company. So kind of an agreement to what you're saying about this whole concept of the chief medical officer or chief diversity officer in the clinical trial. If there was something that you would have, either give them an incentive, meaning that you can extend the life of their patent several years if they meet their what we consider to be the diversity goal. I like sugar better than vinegar, versus then coming back and hit either blocking the clinical trial until they are able to bring that number up. So that's kind of one of my thoughts. But
Yeah, so I agree with that. But one other thing to talk about, a carrot that at least I've proposed, because the one you're proposing kind of requires legislation. And as you know, legislation is never going to pass, right?
We do it right now. We already do it right now for orphan indications. So
yes,
expanded from just orphan indications into a broader level with cancer indications.
Yes, but you know another thing that could be done? Think of it as major medical society presentations. Imagine that podium presentations were given preferentially to studies that were more diverse compared to studies that were not diverse.
Yeah.
That would be something that could be done right now. If our major medical societies adopted that kind of strategy, it will make a difference.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because from what I've seen so far, it's not.
It's not happening, right? It's not happening.
It's not happening at all. I mean, the United States Preventive Services Task Force makes a statement, and it takes you 4 years before even the primary care doctor has the ability to make the changes. So there has to be teeth. There has to be either you get a reward if you diversify, or we're gonna hit you with either stop the clinical trial, or we're gonna hit you with some kind of penalty. But something has to be there right now.
Punitive, something more punitive. I think.
Yes, but see, that's where that ranking helps, because if you are ranked higher, and there are two drugs that are approved in the space, and one drug is ranked higher because it has a diversity score, and people are prescribing that drug more because of that higher ranking, it would change behavior.
What do you think, Carmen? Carmen, I think you were going to say something. And you guys, Dr. Barrett's in the wings waiting to come on. So I'm going to go off screen for a little bit and let her come on, because I think she has some great stuff to say.
Okay. So I think we touched on a number of things and actions that are taking place in industry. So I first want to go back to Lauren's comment around the investment in sustained community engagement. And at Pfizer, and I know there are a few other sponsors that have all made long-term investments in community action. So at Pfizer, we have our Breakthroughs for All program for our Latino community, Avance para Todos. But we recognize that Black people who have cancer are being diagnosed at younger ages, that the severity of staging is often greater for women and men, at the age of 50. So how do we create connectivity by having early education and awareness about, one, what a clinical trial is, setting expectations about participation, sharing information about the interventions and mechanisms of resources that are available, including travel, transportation costs, addressing any absences from your job, because all of those things are at there are higher gaps and disparities in that among Black people. So there is a sustained investment, and also in collaborating with advocacy groups. So what we found is that when we are in the community educating, we have an average response rate of 88% of people have never had conversations with their doctors about clinical trials, that there's a low understanding of what a clinical trial is. But we've also found that the voice of the sponsor is not the only voice that needs to be heard. And so I and Neha work in collaboration with our Patient Oncology Patient Centricity Council, and both Keith and Ricky are a part of that, and we collaborate with them to create educational awareness series to educate specific patient populations. So all of that helps because patients need to hear not only from the sponsor where there's a recognition, but from those partners where trust exists currently. So we're proud to have the collaboration with them. The other thing I'll comment on is around the education of our investigators or the physicians who are conducting the clinical trials. It's so important that we have conversations about what we as sponsors are doing and investing in, but also talking about how they can further expand access to these patient populations who are underrepresented. And Neha, I don't know if you want to add more from a diversity planning perspective, but I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of these points are so critical and really build on one another. When it comes to diversity action plans, right? It's now required by sponsors through the passing of the Fedora legislation. So whereas this guidance is still, not yet approved, the language was recently submitted in April for final approval. Now we're going to see more and more in industry have to submit these plans. And I absolutely think this is where Pfizer has really taken a data-driven approach to ensure that this plan is substantiated by real action. All of these components around how do we find who is most impacted by the disease? How do we take a very scientific, data-driven approach through a calculated framework looking at prevalence, incidence, severity of disease? All of those things are taken into consideration. And with the wonderful collaborative actions and partnerships that we have, as Carmen illustrated, looking at all of these components at large, how can we go to where the patients are? How can we really invest in communities that we haven't otherwise done before? Where patients seek medical help and go to institutions that represent communities, all dimensions of diversity. And then really be proactive about what are the barriers up front, and come forward so that the sites have a playbook in and of themselves to reach patients meaningfully. And certainly last but not least is partnering with key advocates. In order to be, gain trust, we must be seen as trustworthy. And we have a long way to do that. And so by baking this into the way we work and developing a framework through our organization, at Pfizer, is what we are doing and striving to embed at every level, so that whereas we may not have, it's similar, Dr. Vera, to what you're saying in terms of like not necessarily a dedicated diversity officer, but where every person within the pipeline development of a clinical trial has an awareness of what their impact is. And then within the plan, there's close observation of how we're doing enrollment-wise and progressing towards our goals. So this is definitely something we're taking a very close look
I
at.
think it's also I also agree with that. I think it's when you bring those organizations in. I think about, your phone or a car. Could you imagine Apple designing a product and never talking to the consumer for whom it's designed? That's what's happening right now with clinical trials, right? So it's meant to be consumed by our community, and we're never asked of what's important to us and what features, what's important to the protocol for how it's developed. What's important is the advocacy organization is brought in up front and early, not after the protocol has been designed to then kind of comment on it. It's kind of late then, or like after the materials have been designed, it's kind of late then. But that they're equal partners in what those questions are, what the design are, and get to have the community's voice. And community organizations are willing to do that. We also have to make sure that they're sustained and supported.
Dr. Barrett,
And
can
that
you?
finally, for me, it is that inequitable care and ineffective drugs should not be reimbursed. That's my belief, and that's the lever I think that helps to really change behavior. I've seen it being a former health plan executive at United Health and a regional Blue plan. The lever that risk-based agreements can change behavior, ACOs and the like. And I believe in the same way, having those type of arrangements and that kind of accountability around efficacy in drugs and efficacy in these diversity metrics for clinical trials.
Dr. Barrett, she just got in, so could she comment? I know
Sure. Wonderful to see you. Great to be here as well, and great to see such familiar faces. And those, I would say, are the warriors in the journey for this work toward equity. So always great to be here. I'm Dr. Nadine Barrett. I am Senior Associate Dean in the School of Medicine for Wake Forest, and I am also a professor in population health sciences, really focusing on increasing access to clinical research and trials as being a social justice issue. I would love to just really touch into what was just being shared, really about the importance of community engagement. And I think we all know that, communities, our work and outcomes are only as good as the degree in which we engage the communities and our patients who are having the lived experience of a disease. So we can always make some inroads, but not enough. And whenever we make inroads and closing the gaps, it doesn't take long before those gaps, in fact, the gaps stay. It's actually that it may decline. So you may see everyone doing better, but there remains a gap there. And I think that when we really think about what equity looks like in clinical research and trials, as I said, it's a social justice issue. And I think it's also a moral issue, right? An ethical issue as well. When we have trials that are available to people that could potentially be life-saving or at least life-enhancing, and they're not being asked, and particularly people of color, underserved, minoritized populations are not being asked. There's an ethical component to that that I think sometimes we miss the mark on, or we don't really call that out as being an opportunity for us to really do better as organizations. So I fully agree that when we have a research idea, or we know that there's a potential drug that could work if they could move forward in a study, that engaging a patient, engaging our communities in that process is going to make it so much better. I also think that there's a moral imperative for institutions to do better, right? The research is most certainly, there's a research level, but there's also institutions. I mean, when we are talking about, again, studies and trials and therapeutics that could actually help to save lives, and the fact that our organizations are not realizing that if we want to do rigorous science means diversity in the population that's participating in it. Otherwise, we miss the mark in being fully rigorous in that. And as scientists, we often value the idea of rigorous science, but we don't see diversity and the imperative of ensuring that we have, and we're going at the list that we need to ensure that we have that diverse representation is critical. So I think those are two key things to me. And I think we also need to recognize too that implicit biases do play a part in that. There's enough studies that are showing the impact of implicit bias and the way in which some of us are just not simply asked. And there's a study that came out at UAB actually that highlighted that the reason why the research teams were not asking is because they thought people of color were too challenging to deal with. They thought they would not adhere to the treatment, or they just ask everyone the same, or they don't recognize that we're not all the same. And some of us have historical and current history that plays a part in trust and organizations that have not been trustworthy. And so even when we have studies that are showing these implicit biases exist, and that's qualitative. So that's actually coming from the voices of the people who should be asking, right? The research team and the frontline recruiters. So it's not like it's just a blanket thought of a survey. This is from a quantitative study of 91 interviews with frontline teams. And so I think it's really important for us to recognize that we need to know that implicit bias and stereotypes play a part in this, and our teams need to be getting trained up on what that should look like.
And I had a question to ask, just to kind of we talk about a lot of stuff that we already know. How do we move forward and not recreate the wheel?
I would love to just tackle that a little bit, in that at IPG Health, because of our pro bono work, we've had clinical trial sponsors now coming to us and asking us, can you help us diversify our clinical trials based on what you've been raising all this awareness. And we feel that what's fundamental in getting diverse patients enrolled is understanding who they are and not making blanket statements, right? So every clinical trial patient, even if they're Black clinical trial patients, are not going to be like the other. So who they are, their journey to trial, and then the physicians along that journey and what the opportunities and challenges for both of them are, right? And to do that, I'm glad you brought this up, in a data-driven manner and by therapeutic area. So at IPG Health, we are committed to, using our data platform, it's called Epic, to really drive this process. And we have been able to work with clinical trial sponsors successfully. So what does that mean? We delve deeply into understanding both the patients, their healthcare providers, categorizing them into referrers, enrollers, supporters. And our tools allow us to then identify optimal clinical trial sites. So resources are limited when you're a clinical trial sponsor. You should not be using those sites. You should be using these other sites to maximize that resource and enhance patient accessibility. Epic also helps us tailor our approach to change stakeholder, both the patient and the HCP's behavior, right? Through all of these different types of behavior change and heuristic methods. We also think about how's your clinical trial designed? If it's not designed in an inclusive manner, it doesn't matter what we do, we're going to have issues. Targeted messaging, culturally competent messaging, so you get to those patients. And then your commitment has to go just beyond recruitment strategies, right? You have to make sure that you're not just dealing with, okay, we got them in. How do you keep them in, right? How do you ensure that once patients are there, you retain them? And so providing comprehensive support to trial sites, offering nurse navigation to guide patients, having clear, consistent, and open communication, both live and virtually, to set trial expectations as the patients are going along, right? Making sure that patients have what they need, and then collecting that feedback in real time, and then pivoting or adapting your processes if it's not resonating with those very patients. So, we really feel like we have to go deeper and understanding each of those patients, the demographics and who's treating them, and not just deal in generalities or outdated assumptions, such as like, well, Black patients will decline trial participation due to mistrust, or rural patients will struggle with adherence because of logistical issues. Well, there are things you could do that. We all know on this panel that if you ask Black patients in a culturally competent manner, they will be willing to participate. And in addition to that, incorporating flexible trial designs and utilizing technologies such as wearable devices can address some of those logistical challenges faced by rural patients. So for us, it's really getting specific about what the clinical trial sponsor needs to do in that particular therapeutic area in order to be successful, versus just going with, well, generally speaking, these are the 5 or 6 things that we do.
So if I was to follow up on that, I was just going to say that what you're saying, it's kind of, so the problem we have is that sponsors, some of them would reach out to an organization like you and use your services. Some of them would not. On top of that, you do not have an overview function within the clinical trial enterprise. So that if everything that's been said earlier is believed to be true, that diversity and safety are equal, none of us would participate in a clinical trial that is large and robust, that does not have safety mechanisms that are built in at the level of the principal investigator. That's why you have a DSMB, right? Similarly, if there was a requirement that every clinical trial ought to have a diversity officer, like I stated, you are playing the role of a diversity officer for some studies, but you do not necessarily have the authority to do anything when something happens or when those goals are not being met. You do not have that authority to change maybe the design of the study halfway through the study because there are certain problems based on the design of the study. If there was a diversity officer, that's what a diversity officer would do. So all of us have these great ideas, but there isn't an officer or a person who is in charge of that for any clinical trial on a consistent basis. That person has to be independent of the sponsor.
But then there has to be one thing. That person has to have power. And what is
Yes.
the benefit from a sponsor or anyone to have that person in position?
That is why we have to be the ones pushing for it. We have to advocate. That is our responsibility, is to advocate. And then studies that meet those diversity goals that are ranked higher are rewarded, like you said earlier. It could range anywhere from a regulatory reward to a financial reward because those studies are presented at major medical society meetings on the podium. Those studies are published in more prestigious journals because those journals are going to look for those studies to determine what studies to publish. Those studies would determine when the drug is approved that clinical treaters like you and I will know whether this particular drug had diverse people in it, and that's the drug I'm going to choose.
But the pharmaceutical sponsors have creative ways about which they're going about it, and there's something to be said about I call it, pharmaceutical companies at one time did not have the humanity that exists, and now when you bring in the advocacy component of the pharmaceutical companies, now you start to introduce humanity into that industry. And so sometimes they may not be able to go heads up with someone, but I know that pharmaceutical companies are trying to kind of maneuver the system to at least begin to start helping the patients. And that's why you guys are on, both the CMOs and the sponsors are on this meeting today. I mean, this is kind of the first of its kind, if you really think about it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's important that we take a patient, provider, and partnership approach. Just looking at the patients, ensuring that the patient's voice is included in the design of the study, and the exclusion criteria as well. It's very important to include the advocacy groups, as you noted before, in order to decrease the burden and barriers to participating in many of the trials. And if you're looking at the providers, for us, we really want to ensure that we are going out in those communities where the patients are, establishing sites in those communities so that they don't have to travel, 20, 30 miles to get to a clinical trial site. That's very important, as well as, training those HCPs from that community to do, the clinical trials as well. So that's a big part, I think, as well. Also, in looking at partnerships, as noted before, really working with those advocacy groups, working with those community organizations, those medical professional organizations, to ensure that, we have people that are running these trials, developing these trials, that look like the populations that are going to enroll in them as well.
And
And
I just
also
want to take
the staff at the clinical trial site, they should look like the patients they're trying to enroll. Now,
Right.
you are not going to be able to create every principal investigator to look like every patient that's enrolled, but the coordinators, the navigators, there are people within the nurses within a clinical trial site. At least somebody should look like the patients they're trying to enroll.
And then
That is
everybody else needs some cross-cultural training.
I fully agree with that. And I think too, I fully agree with that. There's need for training and there's a lot of need for changing the systems and the way in which we approach clinical trials and including the diversity of the workforce. I know that we are close to time, if I'm not mistaken, Ricky, but we wanted to hear from Sharon. If you could share, right, from a patient perspective, that would be awesome as we get ready to close out.
Okay, absolutely, absolutely. Tiffany mentioned 30 miles. Well, let me tell you about my first clinical trial was in California from Richmond, and I had to get there. I couldn't swim, I couldn't catch a bus, and it was out of my pocket. The second one was UPenn for 3 years, and on a good day, if you bypass DC traffic, that's one thing as well. So when we talk about, again, meeting patients where they are, bringing things in their community, patients do want people that understand, and we really have to think out the box. Now, Ricky told you at the beginning, due to the passing of my brother 37 days from colon cancer, I was asked to speak Easter Sunday at a church on colon cancer. And I said, nobody want to hear about poop. And the pastor said the church would be packed. And it was a huge hit. People was calling, hey, they found 3 pollens. Do you want my pictures? Oh no, the picture's okay, but thanks. So we really have to sponsors have to join together, and we need support as well while we are out here. If I ask anybody on this panel, if you had chemo, some have, some haven't. Trust me, you don't want to be in that space. But who would be the best one to try to answer or try to coach a patient? We band together, one team, one fight. So we do need physicians, we do need science, but we definitely need the advocate voice. I can go in underserved and say, hey, have you had your butt checked? Now let a doctor say that, see what happens. So that's totally you know what I mean? But I honestly can say that and mean it and share the story. I want every person to be able to have the exact treatment that I have. If they once they finish standard of care, and people don't even know what standard of care is. So one of the components that we still are missing is educating our people and where they are. And it may take more than just that one phone call I had last week. The young lady that I was talking to, her appointment is Wednesday. She's right on my radar. I'm following her up all the way. I'm pulling in teams of people. Hey, we need to send her a card. Her appointment's at 8:30. This is what we need to do. We have a list for her to ask her doctor. One of the things is about clinical trials. So we are still missing the boat, but it's so much. When we look at sponsors, when we go to the sponsor and say, hey, can you sponsor me? I'm out in the field. I want to go out in the field and I do this. It should not be such a hard process. Sometimes it's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. And with me, I'm going to do it anyway. So, but
do it anyway.
Yeah, really missing. It's a good that we have in this, and we need to continue to have it. We need to continue to band together. But just know that if you talk to a patient at one time, don't expect anything to happen. It takes more than one time. And again, every Black person, every brown person should have the same treatment that I have.
Yeah.
Sharon.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Sharon, I definitely agree with you. It's important to have culturally competent navigators to help these patients through the process. It's very difficult, as well as health literacy. Health literacy is something that's also very important, because you can't truly give informed, and if you can't make an informed decision if you don't understand.
You don't know.
You can't give informed consent if you have no idea.
To me, health illiteracy is breeding the health inequity. We have to educate. And I think that, one of the things that we're doing with and everybody, you guys keep using the word sponsor and I wasn't here. A sponsor is a pharma partner, if you didn't know that. I'm just for everybody. So we're working with, with our 5 Pfizer partners and all of our partners actually to bring nurse navigation into this conversation. And we had, Annabella Spears from the White House on the last panel, and she talked about now it's covered by insurance. And so there's no reason not to have it. But we think being able to educate patients and talk to them one-on-one and give them 24/7 care and 24/7 engagement is so important. So we're going to show you a little video that we actually just got the cut today that Val and I made to help educate people about trials and about the importance of nurse navigation and the program that we're doing. But before we go to that, just thank you. I can't tell you how grateful I am. Everyone kept asking me how I was going to fill 3 hours, and we did. And the time goes by so quickly.
And Ricky, can I have 30 seconds real quick? We did a teach one, reach one out in the field, and people would say, I don't need that. I'm not of age. So what we was doing is we was teaching people and pass it on to your neighbor or someone you know. So just want to say that.
Yeah, we need to know about clinical trials before somebody needs one.
Right.
Our community have this knowledge before somebody needs one, before we're in a crisis.
Yeah,
was
normalize the conversation.
We don't talk about it. We don't talk about it until Uncle Cookie's in hospice or something. You know what I mean? Until we're in a crisis. So we're so grateful for this conversation. We'll do this again in 6 months. I think we got to do this, every year at this time on this special day, but also we'll do it at SABCS. And we thank you so much for just being our partners and being our friends and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And we're so grateful. So we'll close you guys out and show our video. And thank you. And I'll see you all guys soon. I owe you all brownies.
No, we don't need those.
I'm still waiting for my peach cobbler. So
I know. I owe you a peach
y'all better get in line.
Peaches are back in season. I saw them in a second. So
it goes to your lips, to your hips. We don't need them.
We're going to do a little video and then we'll come back and recap the conversation. So thanks for joining us. But sit tight for a minute and we'll be right back.
My name is Ricky Fairley. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Touch, the Black Breast Cancer Alliance, and a 12-year survivor of triple-negative breast cancer.
Hi, I'm Valerie Worthy. I am co-founder of Touch, and I am so excited just to sit here and talk to Ricky. I am a 25-year breast cancer survivor, and I've been a nurse for 40 years, a long time.
And we are Touch Care.
Yes.
And we are here to help patients with managing your clinical trial.
So, Ricky, let's talk a little bit about a clinical trial, because I think people have different ideas of what it is through the lens of a patient. How would you describe what a clinical trial is?
So I would describe a clinical trial as taking a medication that's not already available. And I kind of view it as the best science we have, right? I did a clinical trial because my doctor told me that they didn't have any more drugs for me. But I think everybody just should consider one because it's really the best science we have. It's a medicine that's in test. I know that I'm not going to get a sugar pill. I know that I'm going to get standard of care, and I'm going to get maybe a drug that's even better that's not currently available. It's almost like getting the drugs of tomorrow. And so I think it's a really great thing. We at Touch, we try to be iconic in how we provide for our patients and try to do things that other people aren't doing for our patients and make a difference in how they're, dealing with clinical trials and understanding them. So I'm so excited to talk to people about what we have to offer.
I think it's exciting because I really see the need for navigation. 25 years ago when I was diagnosed, there wasn't a term navigation. And so patients really felt like they were alone, especially after 5 o'clock. And I've noticed that that's when you get all of the questions and there's really no one to talk to, especially if it's not always side effects related. It could be like community resources, a community advocacy that they may want to tap into. There's nobody to answer those questions. So I'm just so happy that this is something that we can offer our community.
Great. So what are we actually going to do? What's going to happen? You're considering a child and you're thinking about it. And what are we going to do for you?
So I think the beauty is that you can say, if you think about navigation, our Touch Care being an extension of what you're receiving in your cancer center, that means that you're getting 24-hour coverage. Now, who gets that? Absolutely nobody. So after 5 o'clock, when the doors of the cancer center are pretty much closed and people are trying to go home to take care of their families, if you have a question at 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock the next morning, we are available. And for the most part, most cancer center personnel don't really know about what community resources are available. And so we're there to make that connection, to walk with you through areas in your life that sometimes aren't even discussed. And because we're survivors, we've been through this thing.
Right.
We know. We can kind of anticipate problems that patients may have, and maybe we can circumvent, the pain or discomfort that they go through because we know how to work through it.
Yeah, we know what it feels like. We know what it looks like. And just knowing how we feel, knowing how I feel, knowing how you feel, is just a blessing. So Val, when I was sick, all my friends came to take care of me. None of them were cancer survivors. They didn't really understand, but they created this haven in my bedroom. I think with Touch Care, we try to do the same thing. And so to me, it's like a big cozy blanket that we're just going to wrap around you, and everything is going to be inside the blanket. I just want a hug. I want somebody to take care of me and just tell me everything's going to be okay today, in this moment.
Right, because it's so frightening and there's so many unknowns, and it really is. But what they do know is that touch care will be there.
Val, I'm so happy that we can provide this service to our patients. I'm so happy that we can do that. And like, we can only do that because of you and your brilliance. So I love you, Val.
Ricky. Together we make a wonderful team.
We do.
Awesome.
What a
I'm
day.
so glad that we partnered on this, Ricky. This was amazing. This was a really great chat.
And you know, I told you when we started, I didn't know it was going to happen today.
No, but so many incredible points were made. I feel like even I learned so much, and I thought I was a clinical trials expert. So this was great. I'm so glad we were able to do this.
Yeah, I think
I agree.
More of it. You know, we need more of it. We can't educate enough. We want people just to know what they're up against and what the opportunity is and how this can save our lives. This is the best science we have for these horrible diseases.
So Dr. Keefe, I see a panel discussion on the platform of a church, like all of us, really, because there are people in the church, people in the community that will never see this, right? They just won't, because that's not their orientation. But in a church setting, with us just sitting there, and just give us 30 minutes, Pastor, we can change the world. But I think we have to bring it to the people. I honestly do.
You have to bring it to the people. I just wanted to backtrack a little bit. You talk about iconic. I talk about historic. What's today historic? Because this has never happened.
Yeah.
History of the world.
That's what we like to do. That's what we got to do, right? We're not going to do.
You had
sponsors. We got to be
sponsors. You had the White House. You had academia.
Yeah.
At the same table. Now, what's interesting was the glue that pulled it all together was you. Touch.
Well, I left the conversation. Val and I left and let everybody else talk because we got only 10 people on the screen. But no, you know, but that's what we've been trying to do. Val and I've been working really hard to pull the ecosystem together. Nobody can do this alone. And we see so many people out there trying to do their own little fiefdom and make it happen. And it's not going to happen that way. I mean, in my ideal world, every scientist working on triple negative breast cancer or prostate cancer should all go in one room, regardless of their company, and work together for a year. I bet you we have cures. But all this these silos are keeping us from moving ahead. And so we're trying to there's no silo. Bring it all. Everybody come.
What's interesting, and this is something I go back to what just happened today, was at one time, so this last one, you had the CMOs, and then you had the sponsors.
The pharma people, the sponsors. People can use that word. I'm saying, say the right word.
And a lot of people, their perception of the sponsor, this is what this meeting did for the sponsors. First, nobody knew what a CMO was, so they still don't know what their role is. But the sponsors are showing their humanity, because remember, there was no such thing as kind of advocacy organizations in the past inside the big pharmaceutical companies, and then there's still a need for us. We're the community, the liaison to the community, the trusted liaison to the community. And what we have to do and what we do is also give them credit, or we validate all the groups that were at the table today. Because they can talk about all these things that they needed to do and what they wanted to do. That's exactly, but they needed an organizations like us to help validate who they are. They can't just walk into the community. They've already said that. I mean, you talk about cross-cultural competency.
They don't have it. They need us to do it.
They need it. And I go back to is you put everybody in the room together. I don't want to rehash research that's already been done. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of our pharmaceutical partners. Our partners need to come to us, and they need to now take us from the kiddie table to an integral part of this whole process of clinical trials. And that's something that's different to look at it. That means compensate us in a similar fashion.
Yeah. Well, and I think we brought them to our big girl table today, our big boy table, and hopefully they'll reciprocate, and we can also at the same tables do this work. So, so
Yeah.
Taylor, what do you think about all this craziness that we do?
This is cool. I can't wait to recap it all for BDO's Clinical Trial Center. So even if anybody that care about this chat, they're able to learn more in a variety of ways on the BDO Clinical Trials Resource Center, the largest center for Black clinical trials.
Great. And you can always look at our whenwetrial.org site, whenwetrial.org. You can see all of our videos and have access to trials. Dr. Keith is a source for trials, and Val and I are here for touch care, navigation services, and we should do more of it and be open-minded to the science, because that's what's going to get us better. That's what's going to keep us from dying.
And then on our end, from this prostate cancer end, when we talked about the church community, we've already created a platform where we insert ourselves into the churches throughout the United States to serve as a educational conduit for clinical trials.
Yeah.
So, and then taking on the same approach, Ricky, you and Valerie, the objective, we know that you just can't put up a website. There's after 5 o'clock, and we have basically told everybody who's online, and everybody in America needs to understand that we're on call for you. Whether it's breast cancer, and we work together as a team. Just it's not prostate, it's not breast. It's like you said before, there are Black folks in America that have cancer. You call us, we'll figure we got you a network.
We got you.
Help you, because who else is doing it? Not one person is doing it. Because you can't catch them at 5 o'clock. or Sunday at 4.
Right. We got you.
Yeah.
Great.
Lovely.
This is good stuff.
So thank you, Talon. Thank you, BDO, for this platform. We love that.
Thank you.
We're so grateful. And, let's do it again. We'll plan the next one and do it again, and we'll see where these people are in a few months. How they're doing.
I would like to have that opportunity to speak with the folks from the moonshot, because they mentioned nothing about prostate cancer. Nothing.
Yeah. So we'll talk to Annabella. We'll hook you up with Annabella. She's a badass, and we'll get more. We'll keep going to those meetings at the White House.
What we did, and next time, the IRB,
CRO.
The IRA, that Inflation Reduction Act. And
yes, we should talk about that.
That's going to be something very important, because that's going to cut down
conversation. That's a whole other topic.
But it cuts down on the money that the pharmaceutical companies will spend. And the first thing that they do, what do they do? It's about advocacy.
It's about advocacy. It starts with the patient. Guess what? Nothing could happen if there weren't people like us that are sick, right? So thank you, Black Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Keith. I love you. Thank you, my Val. I love you. Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tosh.
Love you.
Lovely night.
Thank you, Asia, for all your help. Thank you, everyone.